So I think now that we both of us are here and it's time, so let me give the formal introduction. So we have Ms. Kavita Prakash here today, everybody. I first of all welcome all of you to yet another live Insta session with one of our celebrity people and people among the fitness and sports field. Today, like I mentioned, we have, yes, totally. So, to give an introduction about our guest here today, she was once a competitive athlete, an erstwhile corporate professional who had been working in leading multinational companies, a resident of Dubai, and now an Pilates expert and the founder and chief instructor at Pilates for Wellbeing. I heartily welcome you, ma'am, for our today's session.
Thank you so much, Janet.
Right.
It's a pleasure to be on board on your platform. And yeah, I'm just happy to take this conversation through and let's see what you've got in this hour.
That's lovely. So just to start off, I think the first and foremost question that everyone would like to ask you is like, you had a flourishing career in the corporate.
Yeah.
And what happened? Like Pilates happened and you left all of it and you took up Pilates as mainstream. Can you just tell us about your journey towards Pilates and what your experience was?
Great, yeah, absolutely. This was about 17 years ago. I used to live in Dubai and had a really flourishing career. As you mentioned, in different multinational firms. So Pilates just happened to me, I would say, purely by chance. I was going through in a sports magazine and came upon this low intensity exercise called Pilates, which was really popular and there were lots of sports practicing as a conditioning program to stay. And that quite intrigued me because when I was in school, I used to be a competitive athlete, and I was dealing with a lot of injuries at that point in time, and some of them I never recovered from for many years. And that's when I had to give up my career. So, and after doing a little bit of research, I found that Dubai had studios. I decided to try both. And especially these was classical studios stood apart from the one. So the exercise.
If I may just pause you for a minute now. Just 1 minute. I think there's a lot of voice clutter from your side. Maybe the mouthpiece could be a little closer. I think people are not finding you audible.
Okay. Is that better?
I think so, but it does get a little faint in between.
Yeah.
Right. I think, yeah, we can carry on. Maybe just talking louder would help. Yeah, please carry on. Sorry to.
Yeah, but I hope I'm not too loud.
No, not at all.
Not too loud. Yeah, I don't want to be screaming on your phone. So
absolutely not. You've got nice
voice. Yeah. So coming back to really enrolling into studio, which was class. Initially, it was very different from what I had, done in the past, or what I was used to doing, like say high intensity workouts. The movements were a lot more subtle, but they were a lot more mindful. So again, first and foremost, I felt so many muscles in my body that I probably never before. And that was, quite and then over the period of time, I realized that my got better. I was really aware of my body, the way I sat, the way I stood, I made a big difference. And eventually, I started building started with So there was a time when I used to practice Pilates about 5 times a week, and I just loved doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
About 2 years later to that, the instructors that I was working with really thought that I had some potential to actually study and eventually teach Pilates. That's when I kind of decided to pursue program per se, because the studio that I was practicing and training at was affiliated with the Pilates Center in Boulder, Colorado. So having enrolled into a preparatory program just to reassess my interest, this is something that would interest me long time. Because sometimes what happens is when I take up fitness practices, initially you find them extremely good, challenging, but over a period of time, the interest can die down. So fortunately for me, the interest didn't die. The whole movement practice gratifying, because I started noticing a lot of changes within myself, and then I continued to pursue it. So after which, typically, as I mentioned to you, when I was a practitioner doing practicing Pilates, say 5 times a week, the instructors that I was working with thought that I had the potential to actually study Pilates and maybe eventually teach. So even though I had a pretty flourishing corporate career, this was something that interested me. And I said, okay, I enrolled into a preparatory program just to reassess my interest. And eventually, after I finished the preparatory program, that's when I thought, okay, this is something that I want to possibly do for the rest of my life, because by then I had grown really, really passionate about the whole movement practice. And that's when I decided to give up my full-time corporate career and enroll into an advanced program with the Pilates Center in Colorado, and study Pilates and eventually teach Pilates. And I would definitely like to say, even though my corporate career was extremely rewarding, the joy that I'm experiencing today is extremely profound. And my biggest gratification for me is I'm able to empower my clients to honor their bodies, and to be able to positively impact my clients through the Pilates method. So and it's extremely fulfilling as a job. It's no more a chore. So I love what I'm doing, and I get to meet different people and work through their well-being goals, and which is extremely satisfying. And so and that's which drew me to Pilates, and that's what eventually led me to move to India and set up studios here in Bangalore.
Great. A sense of achievement in making changes in people's life is what the drive is.
No, it is absolutely, because I think everybody goes through that bit about at some point in time, you want to be able to do something that you're passionate about. Yes, a corporate career is great. It's, as I said, it's very rewarding. But at the end of the day, you reach a point when you say, okay, it's not just about the money. You want to be able to love what you're doing. And I'm really happy, that I found my space, and there we go.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Right. So they are, can you just walk us through the different forms or different ways of Pilates that is because there's numerous present out there. And I am particularly interested to know what drew you to the classical Pilates that Joseph Pilates started, and then they modified, and you stuck to the classical Pilates. You seem a lot very intrigued by it. So if you could just tell us basically what all are present, and what is your major, drawing factor towards the classical Pilates? It would be great for all of us to know.
Yeah, maybe I'd like to talk a little bit about, what the classical method is. So that'll give you a little more insight to why I chose to pursue classical Pilates.
Right.
Now, typically, there are 2 methods. One is the classical and one is the contemporary method. Now, under the contemporary method, again, there are different forms. You have Stotts Pilates, Bassi Pilates, and then you have Pole Star Pilates. Now, with the classical method, we honor and we stay true to the original teachings of Joseph Pilates. So we don't deviate from the original teachings. So by meaning of that, I would say there is an order by which we teach and perform these exercises on the mat and the reformer. So the reformer is a piece of equipment that we use in the Pilates repertoire. And apart from that, classical Pilates was aimed to optimize health and physical performance by working on an individual's core strength, flexibility, coordination, physical awareness, and then I would say uniform development of the body. And then the classical form has basically, it has a unique and dynamic flow to the way the exercises are done. And the equipments are also built to cater to that dynamism which is required to perform the classical repertoire. And progression in the classical Pilates form occurs when a client is able to maximize on, how do I put it? Basically, when they're able to maximize the control and precision in way an exercise is done, a progression happens. And the interaction between a client and a teacher is extremely intensive in the classical method. And having said that, that's one of the reasons our group classes, the sizes are limited to a very small number. So at our studios, we don't teach more than 5 people, just to ensure that you're constantly guaranteeing personal supervision to your clients, because as I said, it's highly instruction driven. And we often tell our clients, you can't leave your brains at home and come into a Pilates class, because it's so much about you learning to be physically aware. So and that's one of the reasons I chose the classical method. It was a lot more intensive, a lot more comprehensive. And even from a certification point of view, instructors, so the minimum certification that the instructors go through is a 1-year program. And you are trained with all the equipments and all the props that is available in the classical repertoire, or as Joseph Pilates introduced it. So that's one of the reason, what kind of led me to, pursue and practice and eventually teach classical Pilates. So does that answer your question, Janet?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To the T. Great. Thank you.
So
we were just talking about like how you were an athlete, you had injuries, and some were getting yielded, some were not getting treated that well. Anyways, basically coming to the point is that when someone experiences a basic Pilates, even a mat Pilates form of exercise, just like an introduction part, they come to acknowledge many things that they have never been, known to in their own body. Like when I tried, I didn't know how, my hamstrings would feel when they're active. To some other person whom I knew, that they didn't realize they were breathing, first of all, in a wrong manner. They didn't know that the ribs had to expand. So there's so many things that you get, knowledged, and it's an invoking process. It's an enlightening process about your own body. So I wanted to know, when you started practicing, what was the difference that you personally felt, and how much of a difference it created to you? Like that, maybe it was a series of things, or maybe it was one moment. So can you just take us through it?
Well, I would say first and foremost, I started getting physically aware. There was a time when I loved high intensity workouts because I was an athlete. So it was important for me to, break into a sweat to feel worked out. When it came to Pilates, one, it was very instruction driven, so you had to really apply your mind. Little movements, you had to be so very involved, just not physically, mentally as well. And this led to creating a lot of physical awareness in me. So that was something what I really enjoyed, and that was something which I had never ever felt with any other movement practices. And apart from that, you know, over a period of time, I would say when you start, you know, getting into any kind of a movement practice, everybody expects some amount of gratification. You want to be able to start looking better, you want to be able to feel better. And the next thing I would say, apart from, you know, being physically aware, I never seemed to be out of energy. You know, I used to have a pretty high-strung corporate job. And, you know, over a period of time, I thought I was able to even perform better at my workplace. And at the end of the day, when I went home, I still had a good amount of energy to be able to, you know, kind of find time for my toddlers at home. So there was never a dull moment, you see? So which was, you know, gratifying enough for me. And I would say, yeah, if I had to pinpoint on one aspect, I would say being physically aware really, really mattered to me.
Yeah. Got it, clear. Right. So you had been practicing, you trained in Colorado, you practiced in Dubai. Especially with regarding to the practice in Dubai. And now you are having your own setup here and you are instructing here in India. How do you think, you know, Pilates is perceived in these two different countries?
Okay. Now, if I have to compare, you know, the UAE and Dubai, now, even though the UAE is a much younger country compared to India, the number of, you know, the percentage of expatriates living in the UAE was a lot more higher, because I'm talking about, you know, the early 2000 or so. And, you know, different movement practices which were popular in the West used to trickle down to the UAE a lot quicker than it did to India. So Pilates, say,
especially Dubai.
Especially Dubai, because of the number of expatriates who live there. And, you know, I would say probably, if I remember right, the first Pilates studio that was set up in India was, say, around 1998 or 1999, whereas compared to India, where the first studio was probably set up in 2010 or 2011, so say, which is about 23 to 24 years later. So you see the gap there, right?
Lag.
And then, you know, when Pilates was set up in, you know, Dubai, the first studio that I worked with was a classical one. So they promoted Pilates more so as a rehabilitative mechanism, the way Joseph Pilates had, you know, working through this whole movement practice. That's what he kind of proposed to do, and that's what he passed down the whole movement practice to propagate to his elders, you know, over you know, a period of time. But by the time it came to India, I think in India, it came in as, you know, it was only the fortunate few or people who were really rich and, you know, the Bollywood fraternity got to practice Pilates. So the rehabilitative mechanism was missing. You know, very often they, you know, people spoke about Pilates being done by, you know, actors and actresses. They saw people hanging off different, you know,
all different positions and stuff.
And they thought, oh, Pilates is just for the fit. So that whole aspect of the rehabilitative mechanism didn't happen until lately. So you see, that was the gap. So, you know, when I set up my studio in India 5 years ago, I would say the first couple of years, it was more about me having to educate the clients that I worked with, for them to understand what this whole movement practice was all about. Yes, you know, people can get fit, you know, you do have certain goals that you want to work through. But again, it was more of a complementary program which helped one do anything else that they want to do better.
Right.
Yeah, so
Well
that's where the
said.
whole,
Well said.
that's where the whole gap was. But I think we as a studio have been pretty successful in educating people in Bangalore to understand what Pilates
Right.
exactly is supposed to do. And I'm sure that people do understand and believe in that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's good to know. And I'm sure
Yeah.
it was not an easy job to start off with.
No, yeah,
So,
definitely not, because again, India is a massive country, right? And especially
right.
for many years, fitness was always associated with weight
Mm-hmm.
loss. So
Right.
people wanted to, get into any kind of a fitness program or probably enroll into a gym because they had some short-term goal to fulfill. So the wellness
Right.
aspect in fitness didn't come about until just a few years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
That's right. Right. So, on the note that you were mentioning that Pilates was assumed to be like, it's like the rich people's thing. And, commonly, if right now, till date as well, I would say that people commonly presume that Pilates is meant not only for the rich, but also for only the women. This is maybe because we had a lot of, like you mentioned, the Bollywood actresses, many female celebrities practicing it. And, it kind of got popularized through their
Yeah.
social media handle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also maybe, I also wonder whether maybe because it's a low intensity exercise, like you mentioned, you don't sweat profusely, you don't feel your cardio going up really high. So, it's a pretty much a low intensity workout session. So
Yeah.
it could be both or either of the one. People kind of like assume that Pilates is a women's, workout session. Is it true? I mean, I really
Well,
want you to convey it out to the people
yeah,
about
yeah.
the truth. And what is your take on it? Like
Well,
your advice, rather.
Well, definitely. One thing people need to understand, they need to study a little bit about the history of Pilates. Now, Joseph
Right.
Pilates was a man, okay? So when he
Hmm.
introduced this movement practice, it was during the World War to rehabilitate prisoners of war. So again,
Right.
the soldiers who were all men, who were all
Right.
rehabilitated. And during the World War, there was a big influenza as well that broke out in
Right.
Europe, if you know. And people who actually practiced Pilates with Joseph during that point in time weren't affected by the influenza. So it was more of a man's movement practice rather than a woman's movement practice
Women's.
historically.
Right.
Yeah. And then when Joseph
Right.
Pilates moved from Europe to the US, he actually had a studio in the same building where there was a ballet school. And ballet is
Right.
a form of dance. Dancers often used to get injured, so that's when he
Right.
started rehabilitating a lot of ballet dancers. Yeah, so that's when a
Right.
lot of
Okay.
women started practicing Pilates. But having said that, because after the movement practice, say, trickled down to Asia or so, men thought, oh, it's just a low intensity exercise regime and it's just meant for women. But definitely not. But I'm actually very
Not.
proud to say that we teach a lot of men. Yes, initially, there's a big question mark that I get to see when I consult with a male client. He's like, oh, can I actually do
Right.
Pilates? Will I break into a sweat? And I most often, tell them, hey, come and try a lesson and see how you feel. And that one lesson is definitely enough for somebody to be sold
Absolutely.
to, taking up Pilates on a regular basis. Because
I second that.
it's
That's
not
true.
it's not about people don't break into a sweat as they move up the levels. Yes, people, it's a bit of cardio too, because there is a flow to the exercise. So there is a transition. So when you move from one exercise to the other, every transition engages every tiny little muscle in the body. So for that 60 minutes that you're working, you basically, it's not spot training. So that's why we talk about uniform development of the body. So there we go. So definitely men and women can practice Pilates. And because it's an injury-free practice, everybody through a wide range of age group can do it safely. So right from the time a child can, take on instructions to however, active ages as well, it's extremely safe for them to do Pilates. Yeah.
That's so right. That was absolutely mind-opening, because it was very important, like you mentioned, that the history be known first, because it was started by men and it was practiced by men initially rather than women. So I think that is a good eye-opening information to all the viewers out there. Right. So Pilates is, like we said, so first we broke the myth that it's not only for the rich. Now it's not only for the women. And now coming to the part that it's not only for the athletes. So
sorry, Janet, I just want to stop you there.
Not
only for the rich. I mean, the reason Pilates was, going back to what we spoke about, why it became popular in India, because it came at a price. Not everybody could afford to do Pilates. So that is why it became popular with the rich and famous. So everybody else, thought, okay, this is just a fad. It's going to die down over a period of time, like any other movement practice that comes in and becomes popular with the film fraternity. Yeah. So just to kind of,
So now we know, So now we know that that's not the truth, actually. Right? Yeah. So, so we know also now comes to the point where Pilates only for the athlete. And I'm sure public also know that it's not only for the athlete. Person who's flexible, non-flexible can do Pilates. I would like to know how it is different. How is it different for you to train an athlete and a non-athlete?
See, now, first of all, we have to look at what the expectations of an athlete is and what an expectation of a non-athlete is. Now, first of all, we need to determine, the physical capabilities of an athlete is very different from a non-athlete. Say even the physical appearance of an athlete is different. They tend to be a lot more toned, with less body fat. They tend to have a lot more musculature than non-athletes. Athletes tend to have a lower heart rate because of regularly exercising and working out as compared to a non-athlete. They seem to have higher immunity levels, compared to a non-athlete. And plus, athletes, if I'm allowed to say, tend to have more mental clarity and and focus than a non-athlete. So the goals you see are very different. So now for a non-athlete, to practice Pilates or any other movement practice, it could be to improve his or her performance. But for a non-athlete, it could be just a simple requirement to feel energized, or say to look fit, or to be able to lose weight. So the goals are very different. So accordingly, programs need to be tailor-made. Now, having said that, athletes also tend to have a lot of muscle imbalances. It could be due to repetitive use of the same muscle groups. It could be due to exclusion of certain muscle groups when they're playing a sport of their choice.
A particular moment in their sport.
And then it could be possibly focusing one side of the body more than other, like golfers do. And it could be, and also the wear and tear of, in the body for an athlete is a lot higher than a non-athlete. So accordingly, program should be tailor-made. And we do that in Pilates as well. So even though the exercises that we teach are the same, with a non-athlete, you could probably progress them a lot quicker as compared to a non-athlete. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So it's basically devising a program is definitely different to an athlete versus a non-athlete.
Right. True. So on that note, I would like to ask you mobility and flexibility, right? So how is it critical for an athlete's, physical fitness and
Well,
the scope of it
okay.
to Pilates as well?
Yeah. Now, mobility and flexibility, they are two terms. Okay. Most often they confuse to be the same, and I'm sure you've
Same.
heard
That's
this,
right.
right?
Yes.
But however, mobility, flexibility is a component of mobility, right? So mobility is basically the ability of a joint to be able to actively move through a range of
freely.
motion, safely and without any pain. Whereas flexibility is the ability to passively lengthen a muscle or a group of muscles. Correct? And athletes, or say even non-athletes, for example, place very high demand in their bodies, and because of a lot of repetitive movements that they do. So when there is good mobility and flexibility, there is a lot of resilience in the body to be able to perform for longer periods.
Repetitively, right.
And plus
without being injured.
Without being injured, and then and it boosts performance as well. Muscles can work at their optimal best without compensating for poor mechanics in the body. And most of all, when an athlete has good mobility and flexibility, he or she stays injury free, and that is extremely important. Now, if you're specifically going to talk about an athlete always works towards achieving his or her peak performance, which is not long lasting, right? When an athlete reaches his or her peak, it's say between 3 or 4, a maximum of 5 years. So they do not want to be bogged down with injuries, which not only can be detrimental to them physically, but also mentally. It bogs them down. So, building a good mobility and flexibility conditioning program or regime like Pilates into their sporting activity will actually keep them injury free.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that's
I think
why
all athletes who are...
Yeah, I mean it's super important. Yeah, it's super important.
Yes.
Sadly, when I was an athlete, well, I think there was not so much of thought into all of these aspects. Yes, we did have conditioning programs, but not to such great detail. Sorry to say this, but yeah, that's how it was.
That's a true scenario.
Yeah.
Even currently also, like the athlete, as much as they give focus to get their core trained or their muscles bulked up, like certain athletes, not all of them, every day's flexibility routine is like one of the most tedious and boring session. They're like, we're already tired. But I think right now that you've conveyed this, they have to register how important, like you said, repetitively performing without injury. Right.
Yeah, because over a period of time, if they don't kind of give importance to mobility and flexibility, as I said, more than they going through a downtime physically from their routine, it can affect them mentally, which can be quite detrimental.
True.
Yeah.
Detrimental. That's right.
Yeah.
That's true. So I just hope that they have taken this point home and they take it seriously henceforth. Right.
Yeah.
So you were just talking earlier about something called as the physical self-awareness. And right now during this lockdown period, and right now that we are extending into the unlocked period, there's been a gamut of webinars on fitness and, health awareness and so many things. And one topic that has been recently trending is a physical self-awareness.
Yeah.
So how do you define it? And you also mentioned this earlier. So I would like to know, how do you define it? If you could just...
if I have to just put it in simple words, I would say physical awareness is for one to be conscious about, to reach their fitness targets without inflicting any injuries on themselves. It is important when people take up any movement practice or sport, they basically need to understand their capabilities. It is not about just following or trying to do any movement practice because it is a fad or it's the next best thing in town, or XYZ is doing it, and they have seen all those changes in their bodies. So one, people really need to understand their own physical capabilities to be able to take up to anything. And I would say one's own body is the best bet, because when you take up any movement practice for that matter, your body tells you if it doesn't feel right.
Absolutely.
Your body gives you those cues. So that is a good enough, reason for you to continue something on a long-term basis, or probably find something else. And that's typically what I always tell my clients as well. When they come to me and, when I'm consulting with them, they do have a set of goals that they come up with. And the first thing that I tell them is, hey, you know what? Come and do a lesson. Try it out. See how you feel for yourself. Your body will tell you if it doesn't feel good. Your body will give you those cues. And that is good enough reason for you to kind of, decide for yourself to see if you want to actually pursue this movement practice. And I think being physically aware is super important, Janet. Now, if I, give you an example, say, I would say if I talk about Roger Federer, right? He's one athlete, sans injuries for years together. He won tons and tons of tournaments until lately when he's been bogged down with some injuries. So now he's decided for himself that he's not going to participate in every tournament that comes his way. He's going to make those choices of seeing where he actually wants to be in. So those are those choices what people need to make. Yeah, so there we go. I think people need to kind of really understand their physical capabilities before they take on to something. And like I said, it's not about aping somebody because somebody is doing it and somebody feels good and somebody is losing weight and somebody is doing fit. See for yourself and your body will tell you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Good.
It's a very important point. Very important point, actually. So Pilates is getting popularized more at the current scene, and I think it is improving in India as well. So I would like to know, through what avenues do you see that Pilates is going to get more popularized? What are the different avenues having the better scope?
Well, you ask me, I would say definitely Pilates needs to be introduced at the grassroots levels. We need to have a lot more kids doing Pilates because since Pilates is so much about alignment and posture, and many of them don't realize that any postural deficiencies or alignment issues that happens is normally during puberty. Yeah, so that's when kids really don't know what's happening with their bodies. They get into all these misalignments, and by the time one kind of figures that out, I wouldn't say it's late, but again, you need to work backwards to to be able to correct those misalignments. So introducing Pilates in schools would be great. And then I would say sports academies such as yours, it's a great way because, it's a conditioning program, which is definitely going to, help athletes stay injury-free. Then I would say, yes, it's important, for us to have standalone studios as well, again, with qualified instructors. Because when it comes to Pilates, it's not the run-of-the-mill instructors who actually want to be able to, study and teach Pilates. Typically, what happens with the people around the world actually decide to eventually study and teach Pilates because they become passionate about it. So having more and more standalone studios would help. Then the other way would be to have dedicated spaces in, say, gymnasiums who have qualified Pilates instructors. That is very, very important. because since it's an injury-free practice, instructors need to be anatomically very sound to be able to impart this movement practice. So, and that's where I see the growth of Pilates can happen. And again, word of mouth. And that's how I actually grew my business, because, when I set up my studio in Bangalore, I didn't do any big time marketing, none of that. It was word of mouth that helped me build my business organically. So, and I would say that's the best way to do it. People reference is the best way to kind of grow anything for that matter.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's very true. Right. So if you just notice, like people, when you mentioned that, our center has a Pilates lab, I just would like to show off that I'm sitting right now in our Pilates lab at our center, ABTP center in Bangalore, and giving the interview.
Right. And I'm so
coming to that point,
I'm so happy. Sorry, I just want to stop you there. I'm so happy that we're going to be teaching there.
Sure.
And we expect to see a lot more sports people in India actually taking up to Pilates.
Right. That is the basic intention, actually.
Yeah.
Very true. So, let me just talk about, and I would like to know more about your studio. But before I ask you about your own studio, I would like to mention to the audience that you all have to know that Mrs. Kavita Prakash's studio, that is Pilates for Wellbeing, is India's first fully equipped state-of-art classical Pilates in India. And it's put up in Bangalore, Indiranagar in Bangalore. Right? That was the first one that came up.
Yeah, that was the first one.
So could you just tell us more about your studio and,
Yeah, definitely. I love to talk about my studio all the time. Yeah, that's something, again, that I'm super passionate about. Yeah, when I moved to India in 2015, yes, definitely it was on the cards for me to be able to open a Pilates studio. And that's when the first studio actually came about in 2015. Now, opening the studio, setting it up, importing all of the equipment from the US, was all pre-planned and everything fell into place. But again, what I didn't quite realize is I was going to be teaching all by myself. So there were no classically trained Pilates instructors in India at that point in time. So I had to actually bring in my colleagues from the US and UK to help me with my teaching hours. There was a time when we were typically teaching like 17 to 18 hours of, per day, and which was extremely taxing. So, and about a year later, I said, I cannot keep doing this. I will go through a burnout. And that's when my principals at the Pilates Center in the US suggested that I launch India's very first classical Pilates teacher training certification, programs. And luckily for me, about 6 clients of mine who had actually done Pilates with me for over a year by then opted to do this program and to study the program with me. And then I went off to the US to actually certify myself to be a licensed teacher trainer, because that's a different ball game together. So once I, certified myself, I launched the teachers training program. And at the end of 1 year, so in 2017, I had, 5-6 people actually graduating out of the program, out of which 4 of them decided to teach for me. So, that's when the business started growing, and we saw the opportunity of setting up a second studio in Bangalore, which we did in 2019, November. So that is in Level Road now. So that's when the whole, aspect of setting up the second studio came into being. So that's a little tale about how I set up my Pilates studio. And again, it's extremely, fulfilling to be a teacher. And I'm sure all my fellow instructors, agree with me as well, because most of them have been, in corporate jobs before, and they love what they're doing
like
today. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So you were just mentioning something about the classical teacher training program. And I believe I've been told that it's one among the best. So Can you just elaborate a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. See, when it comes to the classical certifications around the world, Janet, they're extremely intensive and they're very comprehensive as well. So we do not do short-term certifications. So the minimum certification that we offer is a one-year program where you're allowed to teach up to an intermediate level. Yeah. So and we are affiliated to the Pilates Center in the US, and the program that they offer is considered to be the Harvard of certifications in the classical Pilates field.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So it's extremely intensive. It's all about studying, just not the movement practice. It's not about you learning to teach a certain exercise. It's more about learning to teach the body in front of you. So yes, you have to be able to do Pilates in your body. At the same time, you need to be able to teach it correctly to who's in front of you, because it's like one size does not fit all. Every spinal alignment is different. Every posture is different. And so that's why I say Pilates as a practice, people can just not see a video and start doing Pilates. Lots of people tell me, hey, can we, look at online videos and start practicing Pilates? And I'm like a blunt, no, because it's so posture
Many
related.
people ask us that, and
no,
it's a misconception. People do think,
it's definitely it doesn't work that way at all. So and that's one of the reason I say, because it's so instruction driven, even for us to get somebody onto a group class, they need to be able to do a set number of privates to be able to understand the movement practice, understand the fundamentals, take the ownership of the practice before they can move into any kind of a group setting. Yeah. So does that make sense? So that's so much about, the classical certification that we offer. We have a lot of people, a lot of inquiries people who want to come and do certifications. But I tell them, hey, you know what? It's not run of the mill. So first of all, there are requirements for people to be able to get into the certification. They have to go through at least a minimum of 17 privates to be able to understand the movement practice, and they can reassess it and, reiterate within themselves to see if this is something that they want to do. They definitely need to be injury free. And if it's a lady, she has to be postpartum 6 months to be able to take up the certification. Yeah.
Right. It is definitely important. Like you said, it's never going to be run off the mill, because you are responsible for another person's body. Yeah. Like you have to be qualified enough to take the responsibility and the accountability of any risks, which is not going to happen in short-term durations.
Unfortunately, sorry to say, but in India, there are no regulatory bodies to govern fitness instructors. People tend to get injured with a lot of movement practices that they do. And, but say, for example, in the West, you could really be liable to, a lot of legalities, but that doesn't happen in India. Yeah.
Right. That's why, we have such kind of instances where people just wash their hands off out of their accountability and giving, a proper set of exercise, or being responsible for another person's body.
Yeah, and because, I have a lot of people who actually call me and say, hey, I'm a Pilates instructor. Do you think we have an opportunity to work for you? And I'm like, sadly, I have to tell them, hey, unless you kind of study with me and you certify with me, I'm not going to be able to, offer you a job, because we're extremely stringent on that, to be able to have achieved your certification before you can actually teach.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we are coming towards the end of our session. I think we'll have to answer some viewers have given us some questions, but one last question from my side on behalf of all your audience. So how do you think each one of us here can start or begin with basic Pilates from today?
Don't think about it.
Too much to ask?
Well, no, don't
Right?
think about it. Just come and try a lesson. You know, I mean,
Right.
I don't think you have to give it a lot of thought. First of all, my advice would be, if you want to have a great experience in your first lesson, do not watch an online video and do it. So work with a qualified instructor. That is the mantra. You need to be able to work with an instructor to understand what it can actually give you and what it can do to your body, and then decide for yourself. So there's no waiting on that. Come and jump into a lesson with us, and I'm sure you'll love it.
Right. That was great. So we have someone in the name of Sabrina, and she's asked a question now saying that, do you suggest Pilates in subacute chronic back injuries?
Absolutely, because Pilates, as I said, is a rehabilitative mechanism first before looking at the fitness side to it. So it can definitely help, you know, chronic injuries, issues that one might have. So the answer is yes.
Yes, we can. Right. Also, it is like, you know, regarding the postnatal Pilates session that people would like to get back. Can you just also mention a word about it and guide people regarding that?
Yeah, definitely, because as I, you know, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you, Janet, because with Pilates, we work with different segments of the society, just not on the fitness side.
Right.
We work with people who have gone through surgeries, who require rehabilitation. We work with young kids to correct their postures. We work with pre and postnatal clients. We work with active ages. So coming back to prenatal and postnatal, because it's a low intensity movement regime, it is very safe. Now, if it's postnatal, it depends if you've had a normal delivery or a C-section. If it's a normal delivery, then I would say typically 4 weeks after you've given birth, it's completely safe to start your Pilates practice. And if one has gone through a C-section, then I would say about 10 to 12 weeks is completely safe. And it's always great to get a sign off from your gynecologist before you start doing Pilates. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we have someone we have Mr. Rajesh, who's asked you, could you tell me how to improve psychological effects during exercise? So I think you can also channelize this into Pilates as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, because as I mentioned, it's such a mindful practice, and you can't leave your brains at home and come into, you know, a Pilates lesson. Psychologically, it helps you stay agile. It helps you build your concentration and, you know, your ability to focus, because the practice is so much about you learning to work correctly in that 1 hour when you come to us. And we expect, and that's one of the reasons we always give our clients little homeworks they can actually practice on the days when they don't come and do Pilates with us, say on a daily basis. So they can still keep their Pilates practice up, and which again helps, you know, with their concentration and focus. So I hope I've answered Rajesh's question.
Yes, I think so. Right. So I'd like to mention that we have got a lot of compliments over here to your knowledge and everything else, and barely much of questions. We still do have 5 minutes. So anything that...
Yeah, I just see a question. Do we have a professional Pilates course in India? I think you missed our conversation, Tanmay. Yes, we do. We do run one of India's first classical Pilates certification. So the minimum certification that we offer is at an intermediate level for 12 months. So if at all you're interested, do get in touch with us and we'll be happy to help you through.
That's great.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, I'd just like to convey that if at all people who are, we might be closing in like few minutes time. We have still more 4 minutes, after which Instagram has its own setting that the video, live Instagram video would get cut. So just in case people who have questions and, you know, maybe due to some network issue or something, you were not able to post it in this, do not worry. You can come and DM us, or like you could post your questions either ways. We would make sure that it has been answered by the Kavita herself, and you would be getting the responses in your DM messages. So I think by just in that time, we had some questions here. So we have...
Do you want me to take that up? Purva,
right, yeah, sure. We do have some time. So maybe this last two questions, we have someone as Ivan and someone in Apurva. So we could take their questions.
What is the right age for a kid to start Pilates? I would say about, 11 to 12, because children need to be a little attentive and to take on instructions. So, and that's why a kid's lesson is shorter than an adult's lesson. So we typically teach them for about 40 to 45 minutes. And the lessons are a lot more fun. It's definitely not, extremely stringent like we would teach an adult. So I would say, because we have a lot of young golfers and swimmers who come to us for Pilates lessons, anywhere between, I would say 10 to 11 is great for anybody to get their kids to start doing Pilates.
Right. And I think the last question we have Ivan asking us, what would you describe as best home exercise? Well, I think we could connect this to the part where many people would have also heard mat Pilates. So probably we could collaborate both of this, and you could just give us your view about it.
Yeah, as I said, definitely me being a practitioner and a teacher, if none of you have tried Pilates at all, your first experience should be at a studio and not an online one, if you ask me. However, having said that, we do have a YouTube channel where we post home videos. So you just need to go and look us up on YouTube, and there are a whole lot of home videos that's posted.
Last 5 seconds remaining.